outstretched hand.
Hi, this is Max from Belonging, and welcome to part 6 in my series of What is School Belonging, where I talk to people that I respect in the world who are contributing amazing things to schools and communities to make the world a better place, to make us feel more connected. And today I'm so excited that author David Bowles agreed to talk to me so I can pick his brain about what he thinks of when we talk about belonging in communities and belonging in schools. If you don't know him, David is a powerhouse in literature. I would say children's literature, but it's made for all audiences. He's written over 40 award-winning titles, and he's also a professor at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, where he trains the next generation of English teachers. He spent over 30 years in education as a teacher, a university instructor, and a program director overseeing libraries and ESL programs. He recently was in the news when another author was named National Ambassador, and he said some pretty disparaging things about children's literature. And David was incredible, outspoken and organizing people to make sure that everyone knew how valuable children's literature is and what's being produced is, actually how far we have to go to make sure that all children's societies, communities are actually being represented. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Like, share, subscribe, share, comment, do it all. Check it out. So first, how are you? I acknowledge in the opening that you've been fighting a good fight lately, probably amongst many other fights, but especially for and around children's literature. So how are you holding up? How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I mean, it is an ongoing fight, and there are times when you start to feel that there is no end in sight, but it's a fight that you continue engaging in. And it's been about 10 years of really pushing back against forces that would police literature for young people to the point that it becomes indoctrination rather than something that's self-affirming and that allows them to explore themselves in the world. And so we're in it for the long haul, but it does wear you down a bit, and that's what they're counting on. They're counting on people just giving up. So you have to.
It was frustrating last week when the New York Times did a piece on that author. Because I was like, this is, and I know the New York Times has its own problematic stuff all of the time, but it was this period is such an opportunity, like listening to voices like yours, it's an opportunity to turn our heads to people who have been writing literature for everyone or for especially historically marginalized kids, families, that we know people are coming to the libraries specifically to find your books.
Yeah. Max, the National Ambassador for Children's Literature, it's not that he's a bad person. It's just that he's not seizing the moment in the way that one would hope. It was Martin Luther King Jr. who pointed out that one of the worst groups of people who stymied efforts for civil rights were white liberals, because there's this, this desire to be seen as being involved in the fight, but not really doing the work that needs to be done to center voices other than your own, or voices like yours. And it's unfortunately, I think what the problem is here. He's diagnosing a problem that seems to then elevate work by people like him at the expense of other people, instead of saying, hey, you know what, books are being banned right and left that are written by people from communities of color or disabled people or queer people. And, that's what we ought to be talking about. How in a country where more than half of the children in school, and, that number should maybe illuminate the reasons for things like detention centers and so forth. More than half of the school-age children are from communities of color. Now, it is, obviously a greater percentage than the adult population. That really ought to be what we're having a conversation about. What are we going to do about the fact that books that feature protagonists like them are the ones that are being banned, with all kinds of ad hoc, made up reasons? And in what way does that impact those children's sense of self-worth, their ability to see themselves as readers, as participants in like literary conversations in this country, and so forth. And I just feel like it's a missed opportunity. And there might be some people who say, well, as a white man, maybe it's not really his place to be having those conversations. There have been previous ambassadors like Jason Reynolds or others that have had identities different than his, and they've really made that their centerpiece. And I'm like, look, right now, it's the fight is the same fight for everybody who really, really believes in free speech and in the right of children to have access to literature and the importance of literature in their lives. So, I mean, you can imagine it takes up a lot of my time. I'm working on a really cool project with other people who also see this as an issue, and there's some exciting things hopefully coming down the pipe that will be of interest to people who want to continue this conversation in a way that is useful and uplifting and expansive of our understanding of the intersection of children and literature. And so
this is a personal note. A lot of my work is on schools, and a lot of my work is on specifically adoptive parenting. And to your point, that it's this final white knuckling of holding on to systems of power that used to work that aren't going to work for kids who are growing up. And I bring up adoption because we see this big time. There's adoptive parents like myself. Our voices sort of dominated the narrative, and adoptees, and many with intersections around, being transracial adoptees, queer adoptees, gender nonconforming adoptees, whose voices were totally shut down or left out. Like, we know that Amy Barrett Cohen and John Roberts are adoptive parents who are voting against their own children's best interest or legislating against.
Yeah, from their particular perspective, it's like what you were suggesting before, that the adoptee mindset of cultural homogeneity and trying to, I'm doing a good thing, adopting these children and then inculcating them with this kind of like flat American culture, and I can deny them access to the specific culture of their background and so forth, and that it's not harmful to them. And we obviously now know that it is extremely harmful to them. And that adoptee parents are, it's like a really, really difficult situation, and my hat goes off to the ones who are really, really trying hard to ensure that richness of experience and identity is something that their children experience. And I know a lot of writers who are adoptees or adopted rather, and some of them transracially or transculturally, the work around that is really, really fascinating. And that's, another slice of children's literature that I want to see more work done in. I have my youngest brother is adopted, and while my family's Mexican American, he was half Mexican American, half Black. And so there was complex situation that my parents experienced when he was being brought up. And, it's something that's near and dear to my heart as well.
You are not surprised to know that most adoption books, and these are even pushed by people who are doing advocacy work around adoption. I always kind of, stiffen up when they're pushed, but they're mostly animals. It's the ugly duckling.
Yeah.
And it's just like, even the youngest of kids know that they are not animals. and we have a harsh history in our country of telling people they are animals. Like, this is not the way we want to go. We want some authenticity.
We want to have these conversations in books that are about actual children.
Real people, yeah. So you've spoken deeply in public about growing up queer and Mexican American in the South Texas borderlands. Looking back at your own time as a learner, what did school belonging look like for you?
Yeah, it's one of these, in general, school culture and community culture is complex, especially when we're thinking back to when I was in school and you were in school, 70s and 80s for me. I'm 56. It was, there was definitely a sense of community belonging in that the other students in the school were Mexican American for the most part, even more so than today, although today we have a lot more like immigrants and stuff like that. It was definitely like a sense of, we're all kind of part of the same border Tejano Mexican American culture. There are even like the white kids that were going to school were a part of that culture, and that their parents had been living for generations here. They might not speak Spanish, but they are part of the culture. So there was like a cultural continuity. But the education itself wasn't part of that. It was the social dynamics of the school that felt that way, and not so much the instruction that we got or the books that were being used. And, it's one of those things where by the time I got to be a junior and senior at PSJ High School in Far, Texas. That my two good friends, Ranulfo Marquez and Gustavo Acosta, and I, who had kind of like a ad hoc book club where we would like skip algebra class and go
Nice.
to the library. Yeah, librarians. It's very nicely turning a blind eye. We, one day we were like in the midst of reading a book by, I think it was Alice Walker or Octavia Butler or some Black woman, and we were like, wow, we were really drawn to books by Black women. What about books by Mexican Americans? And we kind of like just suddenly realized that there really weren't any, and that in fact we really hadn't been exposed to any books by Mexican Americans at any point in our schooling. And in fact, Mexican Americans were largely absent from science conversations and social studies conversations and so forth. And it was a real eye opener. That was kind of thing that I learned to read when I was 4 years old, and it was really transformative for me. And I spent so much of my time in libraries growing up, using them as an escape from like gang violence and drugs and stuff, especially after my parents divorced and we were living in Section 8 housing in that city of Far. That just the beauty of escape kind of made me blind to the erasure that was happening, right? And it was, like I said, it wasn't until I was 17, 18 years old that I realized there was something wrong. And then I went on to college and finally read my first book by a Mexican American, Sandra Cisneros' House on Mango Street, when I was in a sophomore literature class. It was actually like a world literature class. The professor knew that we probably had never read anything, and so my Mexican American brought it in. So yeah, that, speaking, because I think about literature a lot from the literature perspective, it really it was this academic culture of erasure and conformity with the culture of power, whereas the social structure was different. And we were really aware of it. We knew how different we were from the rest of the country because we watched TV shows, stuff like that, and we were like, wow, that's not particularly reflective of the kind of cliques that we have at school and that we do. And there was always this sense that maybe it was because we were behind the times. We didn't really have anybody, because a lot of the teachers were white or just kind of disconnected, had gone through the ivory tower, got off to UT at Austin and come back or whatever. And so there wasn't really anybody to kind of help us see that the disconnect between popular culture and our own culture wasn't like regressive or subtractive. It was just a difference. We could layer popular culture on top of the other culture and not have to choose between the two. I think that has changed to some extent in recent years down here. And there are many more teachers who are Mexican American who are from this area teaching in schools. And we do have things like charter schools that bring in Teach for America people, and they don't know anything about the culture here, and they kind of come in with like, oh, let me save the little brown kids kind of attitude, which is not good. For the most part, there is a sense of let's try to make our academic culture reflect local culture, but it's complicated by the fact that school testing in the state of Texas is so just destructive of any attempt to be inclusive in the classroom. And pencil pushing administrators tend to just focus on those tests and trying to like negotiate their way into better scores by eliminating frivolities like cultural awareness or whatever.
Play, cultural awareness. So
yeah,
I was going to ask, were there still things that were valued about Mexican American culture or indigenous cultures? Like, not to be overly simplistic, but was there a culture of storytelling?
It gets a little complex because I don't know. It's tougher for me to say that there were spaces that were driven by student subcultures that spilled out into the community. And I think it was more of like the subcultures that existed in the community, despite the lack of support from academia. And I still remember I would like come home sometimes when I was younger and be excited about something I learned in history. Like the best example I can think of would be like the Texas Rangers, and telling like my grandfather Manuel, being like, los pinches Rangers, those damn Rangers, don't believe everything you hear about them, because our community and the culture of storytelling and history preserving in our community had kept alive things that weren't being included in the in the narrative that was in textbooks and stuff like that. And so I think maybe influenced by like secret histories and dark storytelling, that you would get things like students coming together and doing things like telling scary stories, and these scary stories are almost always like rooted in the scary folk tales that we had all heard as children, but that were not being retold anymore in a literary sense at school. And I remember, I guess this is probably a little more the case for the college level, being in college and being with friends who would be like, let's go take a look at this X place that like all of our grandparents had told us at some point was haunted, or a guy had made a deal with the devil and built this chapel on his ranch, and if you go outside the chapel, you can see the marks in the ground where he dug in as the devil was trying to pull him away into hell. And so this kind of like informal like excitement about those kinds of macabre things was something part of my life, and that influenced a lot of my early work, which was all around like folk tales and retellings of folklore. So like I had Mexican bestiary, and then I had border lore, and then I had Ghosts of the Rio Grande Valley, and that one was like that was super popular. I remember when we did the book launch in McAllen, my hometown, where I spent most of my youth, at the library there, they were not ready for the fact that 1,000 people showed up for it. We had awesome. This 2 different sessions, because it's just, again, like I suggest in the book Ghosts of the Rio Grande Valley, tales of like haunted places are usually a way to encode something about collective trauma of a community, and that's kind of the way I addressed it in the book, to kind of set up the history of a place, and then tell the scary story and then suggest what it might be about it, which makes the book popular both for like lay people who just want to have a good scare, and then people who are like interested more in digging into all the different ramifications of the stories.
That's awesome. So to kind of combine your writing life and your educator life, or maybe it's curriculum design or planning life, as citizen and co-founder of Bring Dignity, how do we protect a student's sense of belonging in school when the very stories that represent their families and communities are being targeted and removed from school shelves?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that it takes a degree of courageous leadership on the part of teachers, and a willingness to get into good trouble, or to risk getting into good trouble. If certain books are banned, for the most part, there's not a level of scrutiny on the poetry that you're bringing, or the short stories, or the essays. There are ways to diversify, the texts that you're using in the classroom, and bring in texts that are more reflective of students' identity, and that will help them to be in conversation with the texts that they're being required to read, which is like the direction in which a lot of red states want to go. Texas is trying really, really hard to codify a list of required books to be read at every single grade level, which will completely throw a wrench in people's desire to select books that are reflective of the needs of students. I teach at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, here in Edinburgh, in South Texas. Not Edinburgh, Scotland. The weather's very different. I'm also the coordinator of the English education program, so all of the pre-service teachers come through my hands. And one of the things that I talk to them about is the importance of understanding what students need in that classroom, kind of assessing their needs, understanding who they are, and bringing those things in there. And then there's absolutely nothing wrong with teaching canonical literature, but I tell them, your job isn't to turn out English majors. Your job is to equip children with the critical thinking and reading and writing abilities that they need to be able to live like full lives. It's your duty to convince them that reading and writing and thinking like deeply about stuff makes life better, and that they're going to be better equipped to grapple with attempts to distort their own thinking and to use them to oppress them or whatever. And so I think that's really what's key. For reading and writing, you don't need a particular text. You can teach reading and writing with any text. So why not use a text that is going to resonate more with students, to make them see themselves as readers and writers, and be more likely to attempt to read and write and think deeply. And anybody who thinks that there's something controversial about that wants to use reading and writing as a way to indoctrinate kids into a particular way of thinking. Otherwise, it would be a problem.
Yeah.
Right? No problem.
So I want to tell you how I originally found you. I was just adjuncting. My friend asked me to teach. Of course, they needed someone, and she was big on phonics instruction and early literacy. And I was like, I don't really believe in what I'm teaching. There's a big political movement around phonics. I was trying to drill them over the head. It was definitely not the richness of language that all of my students possessed in that class, like these 21-year-olds. Like, this was not, even if they had an understanding of phonics, it was not going to be the way to have them love literature themselves and then convey that love to kids. So that's to kids in their class. So that's when I found your book, and then it led me to your other books. But then I found it in Spanish, and I remember they did like their own readings of it to the class. I was like, plan a lesson around this, do it in English or Spanish, and that was it. And the stories, they were connecting them to some of the students they were watching in the classes where they were doing their clinical hours. So to your point, I'm not saying I liberated the students I had, but I kind of wanted to. That was kind of the hope, because I'm also driven crazy by what I think is a very Republican conservative push towards the science of reading.
Yeah,
that's
I mean, what's happened in the state of Texas, where they have now for certification for 4th through 8th, you have to also pass a certification test in science of reading. The biggest problem with science of reading, with all due respect to people who are like into that, is that it does. Well, there's several things that are wrong with it. One of them is that it doesn't, frankly, work for bilingual people. It doesn't work for people who are learning a language that is largely written phonetically and a language that largely is not written phonetically. It's the cognitive dissonance is just not there. But more than that, like so much reading is, especially in English, is sight words, and so much of it is driven by interest. So much of it is driven by a love of story, that for you not to center the love of story and the conversations and the identity of the reader and their intersection with the contents of the book above all those other things is to miss the entire point. And I some years ago, I went like viral on Twitter for basically saying, look, hey, you want to know a secret? We don't know what we're doing. Do not know. Everybody pretends.
Some of the science of, as a former English major, I feel like some of the science of reading is this other area of teaching 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds to be mini linguists. Like, and to your point, some of these rules that we're drilling them with apply like 36% of the time. Like,
and frankly, will be internalized if you just are exposed to reading. When I learned to read in 1974, my mom, who is the one who taught me how to read, was not, employing any of these techniques at all. She just started sitting me down at the age of 2, reading me books, much like I imagine you did with your own kid. Reading books, pointing at words, pointing at images, and then over the course of time, the kid just starts, in the same way that he can recognize a bird on the paper, can recognize the word "the" on the paper, or the word "cat." Oh, it's cat. Yep, that's cat right there. I mean, and it's just exposure to it. There's no need to turn them into mini linguists. You're not getting anything out of that at all. All of these things will be internalized, and they must be internalized. Later on, it's good to learn, when you're older, to learn all of the specific mechanisms that are at work. That stuff is good so that you can then use that information for self-diagnosis and remediation, like redirecting of your own abilities. But at the initial stage, that's not what you need at all. You just need exposure to books and opportunities to learn the sight words and the basics of sounding stuff out. And the whole language approach it's much better than phonics, in my opinion. And it is it's just because it's not like cutting edge that people just want whatever newfangled BS is out there. That's
someone's making lots of money every 10 years when they come out with a new method. Starting in Texas, I know.
Texas and California. We drive that nonsense. Oh my God.
Yeah. So you do teach Nahuatl? just from a little bit of research I did, and write heavily about Indigenous and borderland cultures. So often school belonging, this connects to what we're just talking about, I think, is tied strictly to standard English.
Yeah.
So how can schools expand their definition of belonging to embrace diverse linguistic and cultural identities that students bring from home and from families?
I think that that's really key. I see. It's really interesting that you're easing into it from the position of indigeneity, indigenous languages. When I think about the way schooling was set up in the Triple Alliance of Anáhuac, the Aztec Empire, each neighborhood in the city of Tenochtitlan, there were 4 major boroughs and lots of subdivisions of those boroughs. The boroughs are called calpoli, and in the smaller divisions, each one had what's called a telpochcali. They had a local school for the instruction of working class kids in that community, and those schools were run by people in the community. So you wanted the boys and girls at those schools to be able to, because almost all neighborhoods they were organized around because they weren't all the same ethnic group necessarily. They mostly spoke Nahuatl, but they might be of different ethnicities or heritages or whatever, but also around like a profession. So you might have a borough or a neighborhood within a borough that was mainly about farming or feather working or like whatever it happened to be. And so you needed the kids in school to learn the basics of civics. They needed to understand the basics of their community and their heritage, the particular god that they worship, their patron deity, whatever. But also, the specific kind of tasks that they were going to have to be doing in life, like the entry level of skills to be a feather maker or a jeweler or whatever it happens to be. And like the basics of warfare as well, if you were a young man, because you might be conscripted into war and stuff like that. And all this stuff was taught by people in the community. So very much community-centered schools. And if there were multiple languages spoken in that community, those languages would be folded in as well. You needed, if your community was a mercantile community in a neighborhood and a lot of those kids were going to grow up to be traveling merchants or whatever, they needed to know multiple languages. And so those things would happen. And it seems to me that if you have a school in a community where there are multiple languages and multiple ethnicities, those things need to be in the school. And for them not to be in the school is a dereliction of civic duty on the part of the school leadership. Those parents need to be involved. And one of the reasons that they need to be involved is because the kids, say you have a community that has a lot of Hmong speakers and then Mexican American, African American, and I don't know, Rwandans, okay? Now you have all these people together. They're going to be living together in that community. They are part of a community where they were living and working side by side, maybe in slightly different neighborhoods, but they need to see one another as fellow community members with respect, with deference and dignity and all these things. And so you need to learn about the Hmong members of your community. You need to learn about Rwandan members of your community, and their stories need to be incorporated into the things that you read as a Mexican American kid in that school or a Black kid in that school. And so, it is this notion of how do we weigh the specifics of the neighborhood, because I'm a big believer in neighborhood schools, the specifics of the neighborhood, but also with acknowledging 2 other things: the importance of having, like a national identity, or, like an understanding that this is a school in a community, yes, in the state of Texas and in the United States of America. There are like larger things that students also need to see themselves as part of, and also an understanding of, for some communities, of the fact that those communities have been artificially made homogenous. So, and that's the real catch, isn't it? Because I can tell you right now that if I say, oh yes, we need to have neighborhood-centered schools, there are a lot of all-white communities that'll be like, yes. Put up a wall around our community and never let that change. But what I would say is, when you have communities that are all white because of redlining and all these historical things, then there's a responsibility in that community to make children aware of the fact that, hey, you know what, we don't have as much diversity as community Y, 20 miles down the road. And the reason we don't is because our ancestors didn't let them live here. And we still need to learn their stories, even though they're 20 minutes down the road. So, there's there's not a single recipe for it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But it is important that the school reflect the actual unity of the community and also the aspirational plurality of the nation. Like,
Yeah.
because that's, 15 years ago, I thought we were on a pretty good path. I was like, okay, aspiration is becoming reality. It looks like we are actually moving in the right direction, of full civil rights for all individuals in our country, regardless of any of these other things. And we have backslid so much in the past 15 years, past 10 years, that it is frightening, because now we've regressed, to a time where I think we're heading to back before the civil rights movement of the 60s, basically. The only way to contravene something like that is to have that kind of work done at the local level.
You're also making me think of when children are in our schools, but maybe not in each teacher's classroom, that there's still an obligation. I heard you speak about leadership, brave leadership before too. And I think that's on the role of school leaders or some of those people who cross-cut between different classrooms. Like, again, not like adopted kids is always on my mind, but I work with teachers who will say, "Oh, I don't have any adopted kids this year," or it comes up with with queer kids, or
I don't have any migrant kids. I don't have any. Yes,
right.
I've heard so many times. It's like, well, they still exist in the school, and they still exist in our community, and they still exist in general. And so, it is our responsibility as the adult educational professionals in their lives to keep them aware of all that, and to push plurality as an aspirational positive thing, instead of treating it like, oh God, here we go, gotta talk about all the brown people and the black people. Jesus Christ, here we go. I think that really is what chaps some people's hide on the far right, is they don't want a celebratory tone in the discussion of identities that are not their own. They don't want that celebration and any taking down a notch of the celebration of the typical white identity, or whatever the heck we want to call it, doesn't really exist. You and I both know it doesn't exist. It's like an artificial thing.
It's what we're built on, right? There's recently someone in the special ed community online, white mom, and she's fighting a really, really good fight. She's doing it very publicly. But she said, why is special ed such a mess? How did we become such an against our children? And I just had to write back, like, we're friggin' built on this.
I mean, all you have to do is look at the glee with which people on the far right are coming out and saying, now, like when Trump was reelected, now that he's back, we can say the R word. And it's like, wow, that's what you're excited about. You're excited.
Right. Yeah, that is shits and giggles. But it does go back to Dr. King saying about the most dangerous, or like saying that, he felt the most racism in a place like Chicago versus the Deep South. Like, people, I'll put myself and my family member who are white, we will bristle if something is taken away. So you get someone who is very liberal, but the minute her cheese is moved or her kid isn't getting carte blanche to the golf team straight to Dartmouth in a community like mine, then forget about it. Like, look out.
Because all that is about expediency over ethics. And so, because we live in a capitalist society, and because we do love our family members and we do want our children to do really well, there is a tendency to be expedient in our way of thinking rather than ethical. And it's human. Like, trust me, Mexican American moms do the same thing. They just they're not positioned most of the time in a way that can make an impact. But like, my mom is white and my dad is Mexican, so I grew up with that Karening all the time. The trick is for people to allow themselves to feel that, but to pause before they say anything about it. There's nothing. You're not an evil person if you feel like, oh, this is gonna negatively impact my kid's opportunity. Then feel it. And you should feel it, because you do care about your kid or whatever. But then weigh it ethically and think about all the ramifications, and think about the fact that maybe are not asking you to. It's not those who walk away from Omelas, or whatever the name of that short story by Ursula K. Le Guin is. I don't know if you ever have read about the society where everything is great,
Mm-hmm.
everything they want. The only thing is there's a child in a basement who suffers.
Oh.
It's those who leave a menace or something. I can't remember. It's like science fiction story,
Mm-hmm.
and there are people who are like, as long as even one child is suffering,
Mm-hmm.
for me to have these privileges, then it's not ethical, and I
Mm-hmm.
can't stay here. And so, you know,
But that's not the world, right? How far away are we from we have people who are funding, not just turning a blind eye, funding mass slaughtering of
yeah,
brown children across the world, giving
yeah,
money to, writing checks to on a daily
and
basis.
incarcerating them here. Like, so,
Right.
you probably saw that. I was up at the this
The
concentration
detention.
camp here in Texas, right?
Yeah.
With Stacey Abrams and Michael, the librarian, and a bunch of other people, just trying to like awaken people, like reading the letters that these children who are detained in there are writing. They've been detained well beyond the 20 days that like legally they're supposed to be detained, and just like the horror stories, but like the banality of it. I mean, because it's terrifying, but also there's like this banality of evil where people are just like, well, they came here illegally, so yeah,
Which is just like we have lost humanity.
Yeah, it's like you crossed the street illegally the other day. Should you go to prison for it? What the hell is wrong with you? Like,
and as much as I think Megyn Kelly should be locked up, like I know that if she lost sight of her own child for 3 minutes, 90 seconds feels like an eternity when you lose sight of your own child. So like the idea that it's just one night, 3 nights, 20 nights, 3 months. We just had someone released back at high school here who's like, he's going to go back to high school and graduate. I was like, but the trauma of being in a detention center for 6 months, he'll never forget that. Yeah. And there are no resources available for him to help him deal with that trauma. So what are we talking about? He'll get over it, or is just there's no trust.
Any resources that might have existed at one point have now been eliminated from budgets, along with any tools for helping students from diverse backgrounds integrate themselves or anything at all. It's just like sink or swim. Go, if you don't like it, go back to where you came from, kind of.
Yeah.
And how it really gets me, Max, is the fact that so many institutions have just complied in advance, just like bent the knee instead of fighting. Like I see, like I'm very close to, because I could retire if I wanted to at any point now. I teach within the University of Texas system, and when I see the sickening, like just like bending of the knee and adhering of lips to asshole of the regents of the system, I am just disgusted by it. I would love to not have to say I am a professor at UT.
Oh wow,
it's disgusting the fact that like what they're doing, and when there's no legal reason to, the UT system could say no, like other systems have said. They could say, cut off funding. We've got billions of dollars in reserve that we could like run for years on and completely like just give the federal government the middle finger, but they won't, because like I say, because they're craven, and because a lot of them are wealthy far right people themselves who want the benefits that are going to accrue to them from rampant racist, fascist nationalism. But I do believe that what comes around goes around. Nothing lasts forever. And one of the things that I always, it seems to me like just so inane to be a wealthy person. It boggles the mind.
Yeah.
That you can't just like look back over history. What has happened at other moments when people like me have tried to do what I'm trying to do? It hasn't ended well.
In the end, this whole thing of self-protectionism is very, very, very scary.
Well, I will tell you, to go back to indigenous stuff, the Aztec Empire, a lot of people, when they think of it, they don't realize that there was a single family, that it was the House of Acamapichli, the Mexica royal family that had started in Tenochtitlan, and then over the course of a couple 100 years, it was a subject state, a vassal state to another empire, but then overthrew that empire, and then for 100 years had their own. The reason the empire spread all the time is because that family needed more and more wealth. You have more and more kids, you have more and more relatives you need to put in places of power to conquer another city state. You put them in charge, and you spread. It is a never-ending monster until you're spread so thin and you've extracted all you can, and the people, someone comes along and tells the people, hey, we'll help you overthrow these bastards.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole thing comes tumbling down. Unfortunately, the number of casualties on the side of working class people who are already being oppressed is usually monumental.
If we keep it broken, well, and we keep people suffering, then we don't have to answer too much either,
Yeah.
and we can keep
it's
blaming.
It's that meme where there's the wealthy guy with like all the cookies piled up in front of him. And then this table, on one side of the table is a black guy, a working class black guy, working class white guy. Each of them has one cookie on their plate, and the wealthy guy says to the working class white guy, "That black guy's trying to take your cookie."
Yeah, yeah.
That's the only way they win, is if they set us at one another's throats. But if we're able to stand in solidarity and understand that, in addition to the racist things, whatever, this is also an issue of class. It's, I'm really hoping that people look to New York City and see what Mamdani's doing over there,
Mm-hmm.
and see what can happen when you actually run a city in a way that is respectful and pluralistic, and that holds to account the people that extract the most wealth.
Right. With true joy, with true embodied joy. It is so fun to just, and when your values, your value system, and a value system that's deeply rooted in your cultural and spiritual values. Oh my gosh. Like, that's
the thing that will win in the end, is
yes,
deeply rooted ethical principles that help you to see that living in a pluralistic, equitable society is joyful.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much like wonder and beauty to be had living side by side with people who are very different from you, but who all embrace the simple principle that life can be lovely and beautiful and rewarding for every single person that lives in it, regardless of their gender, their orientation, their religion, is whatever.
Mm-hmm.
As long as we choose to respect one another and to not stand in one another's way, as we pursue our own path to, freedom and liberation and joy.
Yeah. Well,
Collectively,
that's beautiful, and that's sort of all of your books. Your books have those messages intertwined in them. I want to like hug your books, and I'll put them all over the screen too. But it's really cool to talk to you. And, yeah, thanks for all you're doing out there in the world, and putting it out there and speaking truth to power for the public, and educating the next generation of teachers too, which is amazing.
An outstretched hand, smiling eyes, comfort.